Okay, Matt, you're all set. Have a great show.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mike. Welcome to Procurement Foundry's original content series, our monthly Topics in Technology expert panel sessions. Today, we have a fantastic topic we're very excited about, discussing application development. And we have a couple of fantastic panelists to share their expertise with you today. Our first panelist, Mr. Mo Hussain, is an attorney with a broad multi-industry background in technology sourcing, including negotiating technology contracts on behalf of the United States Air Force and leading procurement organizations at Avid Technologies and GE Healthcare, among others. He's currently an advisor to procurementdesk.com, a fantastic educational nonprofit called True School Inc., and Black Dragon Capital, and is currently director of technology procurement for the $2.5 billion pizza giant Papa John's. I'm thrilled to have him on our panel today. Good morning, Mo.
Good morning. How are you?
Fantastic. Thanks for joining. And completing our panel today, Joe Wroblewski has spent nearly 30 years in the information technology field in various roles related to application development and outsourcing. His first 15 years were as a provider through Accenture, where he was responsible for delivery of outsourced application development services for their largest Fortune 50 clients. He's also served as a quality assurance partner responsible for reviewing and improving outsourced operations there. And after switching to the forces of good on the client side, he spent time in the financial and media industries, serving as an outsourcing vendor governance lead, and is now at Verizon, managing a very large scale outsourcing engagement for application development and maintenance services. Joe has been chapter leader for the International Association of Outsourcing Professionals Vendor Governance Chapter, as well as a member of the Quality Council of their executive board. Joe, welcome and thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Matt. Really happy to be here.
Glad to have you. All right, so the topic today, application development and maintenance. This is, I'm trying to recognize the fact that our audience, pretty big today, we're pretty happy to have everyone, scans a broad spectrum of enterprises, large and small. So some folks out there are generalists and are just dipping their toes in the water with outsourcing. Other folks have large, mature programs in place. So we'll try and talk about in an area that will reach all of your interests. And please know that the question and answer section is open and we welcome that engagement. So let's kick it off, gentlemen. Let's talk about the type of software that is ripe for or most commonly outsourced and not acquired just off the shelf. Joe, would you like to get us started?
Absolutely. Generally, when I like to think about, what are the right things to outsource, it's really a combination of two things. What is the industry good at and strong in, and what's right for my company? When I think about what's right for my company, it's the things that are not strategic or proprietary. So let me give one example there. I used to be in the financial services industry. And when they wanted to outsource, they looked at things like their HR and their payroll and their standard apps and things like that. They did not want to outsource their proprietary trading platform that was key to their operations, that was going to be a differentiator against their competitors. So that's what I would look at in terms of internally, things that are not strategic, that are not proprietary or unique, and then also look at the industry to see what the industry does well.
Very good. Care to add to that, Mo?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the same challenges that the actual, the people that are in the business of application development at companies or those in charge of those in departments, the same challenges that they have in finding the right type of resources or thinking about the scalability, the distribution, go into a lot of the considerations when I'm or the procurement role is supporting them also. It's right now is a lot of competition for talent in general, but generally speaking, the type of applications that that are most of the time companies are looking to get support, and it's just like Joe said, things that are not necessarily the core competency of the internal stakeholders, or the company. So it's an ever challenging field. I'll say that.
Yeah, so great point. And just for clarification, there's two ways to segment the software that you're using. There's off the shelf versus developed, and then there's insourced versus outsourced development. And I think that's key to this as well. So things like the things that you would generally develop on your own are things that are very specialized to your industry in general, not available to the level of expertise that you require and functionality that you would require.
Yeah, and Matt, I would even suggest to follow up on that. Exactly right. When I think about things like best candidates to outsource is where outsourcing providers are already doing very similar things with very similar software to other clients. So in kind of your example, if people are doing work for HR and benefits and finance and are using tools like SAP or PeopleSoft or Oracle, and you can likely find lots of outsourcing vendors that are doing that work, familiar with that software, have training programs in place, and can bring to you a depth of talent and expertise, and have dealt with the problems that you are about to, find in your Oracle and PeopleSoft and SAP implementations as well. So those to me are definitely key things. Where I was saying before, where is the industry strong? The off-the-shelf area, especially some of those big ones in the ERP space, are definitely prime candidates.
Great, Joe. Yeah, thanks. And that brings up another point, that it's not just developing new software. It's a lot of it has to do with integrating off-the-shelf software and making it functional for your organization, right? The SAPs and the Oracle ERP.
Constant battle, especially when it comes time for a refresh. The big R word, right? So, getting to a state of nirvana for the application managers, the ones that are managing these ERPs or these enterprise systems, it takes time and effort. So that ramp up time is really where you're leveraging best in class service providers or in-house service providers that you trust. And it's, as Joe stated, I think is a very good point, where we're in certain industries, right? I'm in the food industry, for example, and you're utilizing vendors that are either recommended to you or who have experience from other companies, because they're trying to sell you on something, of course.
Mhm.
And oftentimes, the ecosystem isn't really that big. Maybe we could have a follow-on about competition in the industries, but getting well recommended companies that you can verify their experience is very important.
That segues well into the next topic I'd like to bring up, which is around choosing your suppliers, and more specifically around building a portfolio of suppliers in this area. So let's talk a little bit about how the market is segmented, right? Geographically, size, specialization, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so I'll take that for a little bit, if that's okay, Matt.
Please.
So yeah, if we dial the clock back 30 years or so, a lot of the outsourcing started up in India, right? And so they've had a head start. If you look at it now, you can look at places like Ireland and Eastern Europe and even in Central America that have blossomed over the last several years to do various sets of activities. And the scale of outsourcing companies, you can go to some of the biggest in the world, like, Tata Consulting Services and Infosys, that, have hundreds of thousands of people and do tens of billions of dollars. And then there are small companies now that are shops of 20 or 30 people that may have certain niche type of work that they want to outsource. So there's definitely a wide gamut. And the one thing I'll say is, if there are people out there that are looking to, I think you said, dip their toe in the outsourcing waters, it might be good to talk to people, as Mo was saying, that have actually used particular providers or that serve in the industry as an outsourcing advisor that can help people, navigate the course, because there is such a large variation in terms of size, capabilities, geographies, and specialties.
I like that. Like, starting off in procurement as a young whippersnapper, you think you can do everything yourself. And it's only recently that, that over the past few years that I've really started to value the outsourcing advisory services, the people that have knowledge in certain sectors, but particularly outsourcing. Outsourcing is a big world, and there's nothing wrong with getting a little guidance. True, I'm a believer in that, for sure. But as Joe is saying, over time we have seen different geographies really excel, but we've also seen new markets open up, and business is business. Folks are going to try to get the same type of service for a lower price wherever it goes. I've found great success with some of the companies that you mentioned, and some of the regions that you've kind of stated there. But I think one area that's very interesting right now is that Eastern Europe. You're seeing a lot of great talent being sourced, and people coming out of that area right now. But yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit then. So there are advantages and disadvantages to each region, and you'll find the larger guys, even the big India firms, they today have people globally, right? They're not just sourcing people in India. Let's talk about why you would consider one region over another.
Mm-hmm. So I won't name the company. Being professional, you can't say certain things, but you're absolutely right. A lot of these large companies, they have offices everywhere, and real strong offices everywhere. Like the Tatas, for example, they're such a global, amazing company. But when it comes to region, okay, again, you wouldn't believe the considerations that you need to put into the requirements document when you're trying to make a decision. Oftentimes there's a financial, if there's an investment made, budget investment made to spend money on developing something that's real. I mean, this is not a game, right? So when we're selecting one region over another, politics, right? Stability. It's not just, can we get the best people? Yeah, we can get amazing people everywhere, but other considerations, language skills. You may have a specific language skill requirement because there may be other stakeholders. So I think overall, having a very strong, well thought out requirements document, coupled with eyes wide open to just the fact that you're not in Kansas anymore, and you need to be consider. You need to consider whatever you can consider. Of course, you can't. We don't know if earthquakes are going to happen. Those types of natural things. But I know that some of my counterparts in this industry, and Joe, chime in. Those are considerations that we have to put into in front of mind when trying to make a decision to select a location over another location.
Yeah, Mo, if I could follow up on that, fully agree. There are a lot of things to consider. What I would suggest, especially if you're coming from a company that doesn't have a lot of experience in trying to figure out how am I going to choose, which region to go in, is to not focus on the region because it's so complex, but focus on some of the things that Mo was talking about. Understand, what are your language requirements? Meaning, are these people that are going to be on the phone talking to your business users, and do they need to have strong English skills? Or are you a non-English speaking company and you need other languages as part of that? Understand that. Understand, what time of day do you need these people available? Do you just need them for half a day for overlay, or do you need them full time for your user base, and where is that? Understand the specific technical skill sets that you want them to have. Again, whether it's something like Oracle and package, or whether it's something like Java or anything else. When you set up requirements that way, you can then let the provider say, based on my understanding of what your needs are, here are my recommendations of where we can provide that and the various constraints against that. So I say, because it's so complex and so there's so much variety, separate yourself from it and talk about the true business needs or other constraints that you have.
Start off there.
Yeah. Right. There might be legal constraints for your company or anything else. And then work through that, and then let your providers come through and say, to recommend specific locations. Mm-hmm. And if you're doing this as part of a proposal, you may bring in 3, 4, 5, 6 different providers, listen to them. And if one says, oh my gosh, Eastern Europe's a great answer for you, and someone else says, Eastern Europe's a terrible answer for you, right, it gives you a reason to dig a little deeper and find out.
Right. And you have the metrics to kind of cut through the feelings and the non-business, non-analytical things. You got your requirements there, business requirements listed out, so it stacks up. That's a very good point.
Yeah. So thanks. It's a great overview. So we're talking about things, time zone. Clearly, a factor has always been labor arbitrage. That's really where India got its start. So you're gonna have to factor in cost across all that time zone, geopolitical influences, footprint of your business, lots and lots of things. But great point. Look at what you're really trying to accomplish first, and then back into that side of it. So we talked about segmenting the market based on geography. What about other things? Size of supplier, specialization of supply. What other things do you look at when you're trying to evaluate the market?
For sure. So projects that I've worked on in the past, multiple companies, at this stage, it depends. Company size. I think it depends. A lot of these technologists that we support, we're not the ones who are out there putting the requirements together. It's the technology departments, the people that we're supporting. They may have, maybe niche requirements, or they may have something, just as mundane, or not mundane, but something as normal as, hey, we were trying to implement a new SAP module or something like that. So depending on the requirement, I've been open to working with smaller technology sourcing or outsourcing companies, particularly when it comes to some of the cutting edge agile technologies that that are there. But most of the time, those recommendations are coming to us from the people that we're supporting, and then they build a case as to, hey, do an RFP or do some type of proposal, and we're open to it, but we want this vendor in there, and because of this, and this, right? So in selecting the vendor size, I think it all depends on the requirement per se. But I will say this part, not naming any companies, but it is harder for smaller companies to do business with some of these larger conglomerates because of the fact that there's such a long cycle to become a vendor, to be selected, to become a vendor, to get paid. So those are some of the considerations that also go in my mind, but also probably in the vendor's mind. Do we want to do business with this big company? It's a little bit difficult, you know what I'm saying? So it's kind of dependent. I say it depends. Yeah.
Yeah, Mo, it's funny. Sometimes I'll use the expression is, it's going to be a relationship, and you almost need to think of it as where you're going to fit together, because you're right. You don't want to be the smallest client for a super company because you might not get the level of attention. So if you're relatively small, you may want to look at a company that might be small in terms of its practices, so you get the right level of attention, right? It's always good to make sure that you're important to a particular vendor. So you don't want to outsize yourself if you happen to be a tiny client.
Correctly. Let me ask a question then, and Joe and Matt. So, diversity programs and vendors, that may fit into that small business category, veteran-owned, women-owned, minority-owned. I would love to, not necessarily right now, but I would love to kind of hear your perspective as to, supporting and nurturing those types of entities throughout even this process. Look, outsourcing it's not a difficult business necessarily to get into, but it is difficult to succeed in. A lot of it has to do with the fact of, just getting an opportunity to supply a service, and then you grow from there. But I would love to hear, how you've dealt with smaller vendors in the past, not specifically, but.
Yeah, Mo, if it's okay, I'll take a first shot there. So you're right. So there are definitely organizations that specialize in making sure that they find a set of vendors that have diverse backgrounds. So whether that's minority owned, women owned, Native American owned, veteran owned, as well as things that serve underprivileged cities and things like that, or that, build up their clientele and their resources from there. So if you're interested in that, you definitely have to subscribe to the key organizations, because they do all the legwork to gather that. And then here was kind of the rule that I used to try to do is within each category of spend that you're going to have. So we're talking about application development maintenance. As you're going to invite people in for proposal, always make sure that you're inviting at least someone to the party to compete. Right. Sure. And then when it gets in there, you'll be able to see their experiences and their pricing, and you get to evaluate it. But if you don't have basically registrations to those organizations and access to their lists, it can sometimes be hard to find someone to invite to the party.
Precisely.
So that's why I'm a strong proponent of sign up. It's not expensive. They love it. And they love it when providers sign up, and they'll get you all the stuff you want. But it helps you kind of get out your invitation list so that you can at least be fair and get exposed to a different set of providers. And you may not pick them all the time, but that's okay, because even if they come in for a discussion, you may learn something, you may get a network, and there may be something else down the road. And
I'm a firm believer in that. So that's good advice. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah. And the only thing I would like to add to that, in some of the conversations I've had with supplier diversity professionals and experts, is that if you're trying to meet certain supplier diversity metrics, it's critical to make sure that you're reaching out to the organizations and you know who's certified and who's available in the marketplace. But if that's not your primary factor and you're just trying to look from a more social advancement standpoint, it's helpful to look at the employee base of the suppliers. So if you look at a lot of these developing countries and where a lot of these suppliers come from, not just India, but around it, they really have done extraordinary work lifting up women in particular and giving them employment opportunities that they historically have not had. And IT is a fantastic place for that. So it's helpful to keep that in mind as you're evaluating that.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I'm actually very impressed with a lot of the companies that I've come across, particularly from India or Pakistan or even Armenia. You know, they really have done a really good job with lifting up underserved or underrepresented groups like women, for example. India is a big country, of course, but it's very heartening. Yeah, very good point.
Agree. Great. So we talked about the geographic and the niche. I think a lot of this, though, is going to be when you talk about building up portfolio suppliers. A lot of that's going to be almost a luxury of how large you are, right? How much of a pie do you have to carve up and give out to different folks out there? Because we're all procurement professionals, and the first thing, kind of that mantra that's beaten to our head, is limit the number of suppliers. So, Joe, I know I've seen your approach to this. Is it still the best practice out there to kind of consolidate to a small number of preferred providers to give out your work to, and then expand as you can to develop a more diverse portfolio of capabilities, or would you recommend that people starting out go project by project as opposed to having preferred suppliers in the loop?
Yeah, I'd say the answer may depend a little bit in terms of where you are today. So if you haven't dipped your toe in it all, you might want to take a different approach than if you have some type of base there right now. I would say a good end goal, and maybe this matches you, I like to use the term the comfortable few. Like, never get down to one. And let me go back in terms of general. One of the reasons outsourcing works is because instead of being comfortable as an employee base where we may not be as driven, there's an external company, an entity that we can hold to certain service levels. And as humans, we're sometimes more comfortable holding someone else to a standard than our own internal folks on things like application development. What we don't want to do is recreate that and swap out, one big employee base of application development for one big provider, because then they don't have maybe the same incentive to continuously improve. So I would say have a portfolio of a comfortable few, where maybe they have some base of activity, but they're still competing against one another in the new work that you have out there. That way they have some critical mass to invest and to have the strength of the relationship, but they still have the incentive to grow and to bring new opportunities and best practices. So that's why I would keep, it's almost like when I said relationships before, almost think about it, you're continually dating a couple of people because you want to make sure that they're both out there and they want to know who you invite into dinner next week. So again, keep them on their toes a little bit and make sure that they're taken care of with their base work, but that they can compete for any new work as you're growing.
So, all great stuff. So let's start then. You've got your suppliers. And so if you have multiple suppliers, one of the things I think it's important is that you have a level playing field. And a level playing field probably implies that you have the standardized contract terms and conditions, right? You want everybody to have, so that that's not something you need to consider as you're doing project by project bidding. So let's talk about that. Contracting is in this area is probably the most complex of anything we're ever going to touch in technology or almost any other sourcing thing. Let's talk about the things you want to take into consideration as you're building out your contract terms.
Sure. Of course, milestones, for project-based milestones are very important for the service level agreements, right? And throughout my career, I've seen well done contracts, and we all have, right? And then we've seen contracts that are just like, why are we here? The ability to terminate is terminate, for cause or for convenience, of course, that's best for us, but for cause with actual stipulated kind of steps, I've seen succeed, where you're able to say, well, some type of cure period, 90 days or something, with some type of notification. So being able to monitor the milestones, having clear termination rights, and just kind of understanding, where the risks are from the development side of it, because it's also based upon the requirement that you're building. If it's completely experimental versus something like, we're implementing Salesforce, or not, I won't say Salesforce, we're implementing something that is off the shelf or common, right? Having contract terms that are connected to the level of risk is very important. You may, if it's super risky, you may actually try to negotiate some type of termination for convenience versus just termination for cause, which is the commonality. So those are the kind of things I think come top of mind for me right now.
Thanks, Mo.
Yeah, if I can throw one or two on there, the big one that I'm seeing right now, information security risk.
Oh yeah, GDPR. Yep.
Ransomware, hacking, right, is stuff that's so much more prevalent now, and it can happen to if you Google it in the news, you'll see a lot of, even some of the big providers that are out there.
Oh yeah.
They're victims of ransomware. And what are you going to do in those situations? So that would be a contract term that will also continue to change. So it's one of the things you want to make sure in your contract is your ability to add new policies, new concerns as different threats like this, especially in information security, grow over time. The other thing that is very important, especially for application development, is to understand the handoffs, right? We don't want anyone ever think that, hey, I've outsourced that, therefore I do nothing now, right? The retained organization definitely has activities to perform. Yeah. And it actually formalizes the handoffs, which used to maybe be less formal across employees or departments, to now there has to be a formal handoff of, okay, what's the provider going to do up front? Maybe it's create the demand, define the requirements, whatever it is. And then how do I deliver that request to the provider that now needs to go do the development? And then how do they deliver that back to me? So making sure that there are clear responsibilities and clear handoffs of inputs and outputs is something that's a little bit tough if you don't already have a formal process in place within your IT organization.
And along with that, just overall intellectual property protection, right? Don't want to see your code showing up out there on the interwebs, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Let's talk about HR factors, for example. Co-employment risk is very, very top of the headlines these days. How do you handle that when the life cycle of the people working on the projects?
Yeah, it's funny because even if I think there are great lawyers that are spending time to put the language in the contracts where it says 17 times over, this person's not my employee. But if someone raises a claim, it says, wait a minute, they sat in the same building and they did the same work and they got the same and they're invited to the same meetings. Why is that different? So I think that's why the roles and responsibility separation is important. Make sure that things that are intended to be internal remain only internal, right? It may feel good to say, well, let's invite them to everything because they're in the building or part of the team. And that's good. But you still want to make sure that you have, again, a formal separation in terms of, again, the responsibilities and just the types of activities that are performed across the two different organizations.
Yeah, and have that contractually, like, being able to, for example, hire a resource that you've gotten from some type of outsourcing partner. Of course, that type of language in these agreements is important. But what I found is, a lot of companies don't have these considerations, Joe, that that unfortunately, right, they don't understand that having some separation between the contractor and what he does and being specific about it versus an employee, and it can come and bite you, down the road if there is a problem. Most of the time, these outsourcing partners are trying to make you as happy as possible so they can get more business. But very, very good point.
Yeah, and it complicated even more so by the fact that it's state by state regulation. If you're in California, it's going to be another animal, and you got to figure New York usually follows close behind what California does. And what's your safe harbor around how long somebody can be on your books before you have to start treating them like an employee? All of that is very complicated, and I think you both agree that that's the sort of thing that if you don't have the internal expertise to contract for, go out and get some advice from some professionals who've done this before.
Exactly.
Yeah. And Matt, just one other thing on that is, having seen some of these discussions or raising of issues in terms of co-employment, I think it looks better for the company is if, even if they don't have everything known or whatever, that on a periodic basis, once a year, twice a year, they go through the effort to try to identify any issues with this. I think that shows the intention of the company to say, look, we were trying to find if we had anyone that was not being treated the right way or whatever, and to address it as necessary, to kind of have those steps in place. And again, for those of you that may have not done a lot of outsourcing, there is a lot of work to govern the relationship. It's not a sign the contract and go play golf. There's a lot of interaction that needs to take place in terms of managing the contract, managing the people, making sure the delivery is of an appropriate level, that the measures of success that you have in place are being tracked and managed appropriately. So, that would probably be the one of the key cautions I have for people is expect to invest a lot of time to make an outsourcing arrangement work.
Well said.
Yep.
And absolutely critical. So I think anytime you start an engagement with any of these outsourcing providers, they'll be the first ones to tell you that having that ongoing relationship, being involved, really makes a difference in the energy level and the productivity of the team that you're engaging. Great stuff. Let's talk a little bit about pricing models, right? Because obviously, we talk a lot about it's more about value and getting expertise and things these days. We're as procurement professionals, we're trying to be less laser focused on just price. But how can we structure these agreements so that we get all the cost advantages that we're looking for and the value that we're looking for? And what types of different pricing models are there out there?
Of course, there's the hourly, right? Flat hourly. And based upon what's the estimated budget, which is normally worked out with maybe one or three vendors. You're trying to get the idea of what a project cost is going to look like, and that by itself is a process, as you can imagine. Trying to estimate something, especially if it's something like a major implementation. You kind of have to rely upon the expertise of the counterparties that you're dealing with, and come up with an idea of how much it should cost. But hourly plus some type of success fee. Those are the kind of things. Those are the kind of models I've seen.
Yeah, and I agree. There's what you call hourly. I'd sometimes call time and material versus fixed fee. The question there is, how much work are you getting for that fixed fee? Right. Sure. One thing that could be difficult is, all right, I'll negotiate a fixed fee so I know the cost of everything. But if you have 50 or 100 releases that you're doing on an annual basis, do you want to go through and estimate on a fixed fee basis those 50 or 100 items? That could be tough. A blend of that is something that might be called like a fixed capacity. So you say, here's the amount of cost I'm going to give to you in block, and you're going to manage it. And I'm going to kind of fill the bucket with projects, and we're going to just track that along. And only if we go above a certain threshold will we discuss whether to delay or add more resources and price. So again, any type of relationship with a vendor, whether it's outsourcing or just going out to buy a pair of sneakers, you want a vendor that's good, fast, cheap, and easy. and you got to find the right blend of those in
Pick
terms
two.
of the exactly right. In terms of what makes the most sense, right? How important is quality to you, right? Versus, the timeliness to do something versus how easy it is and the cost factor. So it's kind of getting the right thing that meets the objectives for your area.
Yeah. Going back to, just so one of the first things I learned at the Air Force, actually, in procurement as a copper cap, it's risk, that spectrum, that plane. On one side, you got the firm fixed price. On the other side, you have the time and materials. And depending on what your appetite is as a company who wants to pay for something, and a clear understanding of your requirements, somewhere in there is where you're going to have where you're going to make your pricing model. Time, material, is it unlimited, or is there some type of cap? And then that for a fixed price, which is, I'm going to give you $10,000 to develop this app right here for me with your resources in Bangladesh, and then go make it happen, right? If you don't have good controls, particularly on the time and material, you can really get in trouble. I've seen it happen again and again. But the companies that do have the good controls, that do have good monitoring of milestones, particularly on your, what you're paying, and how the invoices are coming in, and how, what's the approval for those invoices, and what's the proof of the work that was, done. Those are the companies that oftentimes, really succeed in their vendor management, on their vendor management, and have success.
And Matt, to tie it back to one of your earlier points about having a single vendor versus multiple vendors, it's another reason to have multiple vendors is that you can have a little competition, built into the system. So you understand if someone comes back and says, I'll be happy to bid on this, it's $1 million. And someone else comes back and says, I'll do that, it's $100,000. You can talk to make sure that everyone, that they understand the requirements properly, and that you understand the pricing that goes into it. And maybe the $1 million one knows it better and understands the risk, what it's really going to cost, but at least it forces you to have that discussion by having two quotes, by having, at least two providers in-house that can give you advice on these types of items as they come up.
Yeah, exactly. Those discussions sometimes become really critical in maintaining your expertise in what's going on, because when you start out in outsourcing, especially if you've been doing it yourself, let's say you're not just a startup and you're outsourcing everything because you just don't have the capacity to begin with. But let's say as you move over, what it cost you and what effort it took for you to do certain things. And you know that if the other guys are doing it for less, that's a win. But as you continue in that space, you start losing that expertise. You don't have the people doing it anymore. You lose that institutional knowledge of what things should cost and what the efforts involved and what the best new ways of doing things are. And by having that engagement and that relationship with the suppliers where you can talk to both and kind of triangulate, it keeps you up to speed on what you need to know.
Matt, that's a great point. When we were talking before about the apps and kind of what areas to outsource, we talked through that. We didn't necessarily talk about what roles to outsource in those areas.
Great point.
And you touched a point with me. Absolutely critical to maintain your functional subject matter experts within the company. If you lose that, then you lose touch with what you're trying to do and to prioritize and all those things. So I would definitely advise companies, don't get so caught up on the labor arbitrage where you actually outsource stuff that is unique and special, which is your functional subject matter expertise and at least some technical expertise, so that you can then interact with the people doing the development and maintenance and testing activities. But that's worth a whole lot more than some of those, the labor arbitrage will be if you lose your functional experts.
Absolutely. I have to agree 100% there. A lot of companies think that they can outsource themselves to a solution, but it's also it's the internal stakeholders, those functional brains, the people inside the walls that are actual employees who are going to be the best guides for your success. And we've seen it. Companies lay off people, and then they lose that brain trust, and all of a sudden now they have some type of black hole that they need to fill. But if they can think, as you said, Joe, think ahead. Particularly with investments to our material, like significant money that's being spent on outsourcing. on a particular project. They should think about that before they make decisions that may bite them in a negative way down the road.
So,
Especially right now. Yeah. Sorry.
No, thank you. That's so. While it seems like the natural next thing to discuss, we hinted at it, is measures of success. We've got the contracts in place. There's going to be all sorts of KPIs, SLAs, milestones. There's going to be budgetary things. How best to measure the success of these programs, and how do those measures evolve over time?
I'll start with a general principle. And before we talk about specifics, the most critical thing I would suggest is, if you're going to have an outsourcing company or several do application development for an IT organization, their measures should be exactly the same measure that the IT organization is measuring themselves and reporting out to their internal clients. So to me, you should understand how you're measuring the success of the IT organization as you share with your business customers or the CFO or your internal clients. That shouldn't change. And the fact that you may have different bodies or different hands on keyboards, doing stuff, we shouldn't invent different metrics that aren't tied back to the business. So that would be my general principle. And we can talk about maybe some of the specifics, but that to me is fundamental. If you don't have a set of metrics for your internal IT organization and you're about to outsource, define how you want to represent your measures to your clients, and then build that into your contracts.
Yeah, and the beauty and one of the important outcomes of that is that you have an apples to apples comparison to the before and after, which is critical, because when there's going to be a lot of pushback when you decide to outsource, and there's going to be a lot of political backlash, and people will forget just how perhaps not so great they were at something when they were doing it themselves. And by having that apples to apples comparisons, you can say, this is how we were doing it by this measure. This is how we're doing now by that measure. Really goes a long way to getting the buy-in and the sustainable buy-in of your stakeholders. So Joe, want to talk a little bit more about like specific measures?
Absolutely. So to me, if I think about it from a customer point of view, I want to know, how frequently am I having issues? And when I have them, how severe are they? And then how quickly are they fixed, right? If I'm a user of an app, right, that's what I want to know from my IT department, is how many times I went down. So the things there are outage frequency, outage severity, and then some type of mean time to repair, mean time to recover. Because that's the type of thing that the users of the applications should know. And if it's an internal HR system, they may say, yep, we always have downtime between these hours or on these days of the week, and that gets moved aside. But if people are going in to try to do their 401k changes or their training updates, you want to have particular expertise or information around when those things should be available. So again, that's how I think about it. Your end customers of the applications, how do they view it? And that to me are some of the most important. And then the other side of that will be, am I getting the features and functionality quickly and with quality? So I may be up all the time, but if the application still stinks and I don't get the features I need, it's not particularly helpful. So the time to actually implement features is something else that is a popular metric in the IT world that IT organizations should do for their customers and hold their outsourcing partners to those as well.
Defining at the beginning the requirements, just kind of add on, having a very, very clear, defined, mutually defined, with the partner, success criteria. I've seen that succeed, particularly with complex projects, or projects that you may not think that would be contentious if one piece of it falls apart. So just having all the requirements at the beginning and agreed upon makes a big difference, and makes it easier to identify that success that you want at the end as an end product.
So,
and Mo, actually, one quick thing, Matt.
Yeah.
Part of things that, again, forget the outsourcing for a second, that IT organization should do is have metrics between both the people providing the requirements and the people doing the development. So yeah, as an IT guy, I want to make sure that my, quality is good, my defect density is low, but I also want to make sure that the requirement stability by my clients who are providing me the business requirements is of high value. Because if that changes frequently or I don't get as much lead time, then there's a more likelihood of error in the system that gets developed. So having metrics that kind of keep both sides accountable to a smooth process end to end, I think is helpful. Again, that should be set up for the IT organization with their business clients up front and then worked into the contracts. And then the outsourcer just picks up some of the activities that were already defined as part of the process.
Yep.
Yeah, and that lends itself to opportunities for, say, gain share in the costing, where we set things that we can work on together to improve efficiencies, improve productivity, and we both win, the supplier and the customer in those models. And Joe, one of our mutual friends likes to talk a lot about when looking at dashboards and the red, yellow, green. He calls them the watermelon charts, where everything's green on the dashboard, but to the end users, they look red. They're still not happy. And getting all those definitions understood and evolving them over time, it just seems to be an unavoidable reality of what we do.
Yeah, totally.
Matt, I'm sorry, Joe. Matt, it's Mike from the control room. Just want to make sure we've got some questions from the audience in case you guys want to take them. They're in the chat room for you so you can see them. Lots of activity online. So just wanted to let you know that. If you want, I can get to those, or we can just keep chatting, whatever you want to do.
Sorry, no, I was looking at the Q&A. Let me take a look at the chat. I apologize for that. Yeah, no, we got a little time. Let's do that. Let me
Matt, I'll give you 10 seconds to look if you want, and I'll do a quick reply to your item on the watermelon.
Please.
If it turns out that you have a dashboard that's always green, it's probably the wrong dashboard, because there's always room for improvement on various things. And as people, we sometimes get concerned about seeing red. I would say for those of you that are going to be clients to outsourcers, be open and welcome to having metrics that are failing. That actually provides the right view of things, and you get to focus on what's important. Don't beat up people just because a metric's red. Look to understand what it is, why it's the right metric or wrong metric, and then see how things can improve. So setting that tone of it's okay that we're not always green and we look for improvement is the right tone that you want to set with your providers.
Great stuff. So yeah, some great questions on the board. A couple of them will jump out at. One is about going back to the issue of size. How big do you need to be to step into this? And then how do you balance, how does that impact the size of the supplier that you did? We talked about that a little earlier. You want to be big enough to have influence on the supplier, but not so big that they can't handle it. And any other thoughts on that? Like, how big do you need to be to start doing this?
Sure. So I've personally, been involved in projects where, we're dealing with mega companies, like we mentioned, huge enterprises, but we've also had, we also had my last company, we actually had a program where we nurtured smaller enterprises that are app development companies, 5 or 10 people, but we had a program to help them get to, to be able to compete. So it depends. It depends on the ability of the company to actually provide a viable service. I think that's step one. You got to be able to do what you got to do. You got to be able to do what you say you want. You're contracting for. But it does help if if the potential vendor or potential customer has programs that allow smaller enterprises. But depending on the size of the project or the type of risk the customer is trying to get into, I think the answer is it depends. But step one is to have proficiency. You could be a one person outsourcing company, one person, yourself, right? You're the consultant, and everyone wants that Fortran experience that's gone through the wayside. So kind of depends.
Yeah, and another question tagging on to, I'm taking a couple questions together here, but we talked about the different geographies and regions and that sort of thing. People are asking about it. Are there places where specific types of coding, specific technologies are better served than others? And I'm going to just say, not really. But what I think is the good question there is, how do you find those niche providers? How do you find people, the smaller guys with those specializations? We all know how to find Tata and HCL and those guys. How do you find the specialists out there? as a sourcing professional?
Yeah, I think one way would actually be through networking organizations, as whether it's a sourcing and procurement or technology. So if you're in a relatively unique technical area, you may want to go to conventions or people specialize on that, and there'll always be booths there, et cetera. Or
Procurement Foundry.
There you go. There happens to be one, right? So there are definitely some places to go, whether it's through an advisor or through various networking organizations. Again, even going through your people on LinkedIn, like having a LinkedIn network is very helpful just to define connections and start going that way for the truly niche areas. All the big players will tell you they can do anything.
And they can.
And they're probably right. Exactly. They're probably right. But if you're really looking for some unique expertise, you're going to have to dig a little deeper and have the conversations with people that have done it before.
For sure. Absolutely. And it may not even be niche expertise. Maybe a company wants to develop a small vendor development program, and being able to go back to these networks, Joe, that you're saying, that the LinkedIn or the procurement, your professional organizations,
IAOP,
Procurement Foundry, and that's where I want to start from day one, right?
of course.
I got to plug you guys. No, so just having a network helps. Absolutely.
Great. So got a few more minutes here before we wrap up. Kind of the gorilla in the room that we always need to bring up these days, COVID. How has the stuff we've been going through impacted this? Impacted either the decisions to outsource or the effectiveness of outsourcing AD&M?
I'll start. So obviously it has, right? Obviously it has. The whole work from home, right? So, or and actually, so app development is what I should be focusing on, but right now my mind just went to outsourcing as a whole, in my head. So, a lot of companies would normally hire candidates that are local and they come to the office, right? And a lot of companies just have that type of tempo. But some companies, they are very comfortable with wholesale outsourcing of, let's say, engineering, development, and everything's offshore, right? But even the offshoring, let's say, for example, engineering development is outsourced to a vendor in the Ukraine. Well, most of those people are still going to the office. So COVID has impacted the way in which people work. I think just work in general. And for existing requirements or existing programs that I've seen, there's new considerations, like how are we still going to get the output that we need and the results that we need while people may not be able to go to the office? Or how's data security now going to be, how's data security going to be impacted? Those people were before working on slim systems or systems inside of an office. Now they're going out into their local market, into their neighborhoods, and using the Wi-Fi. How's my data going to be secure? So there's a lot of considerations. So the answer from my side is it has significantly impacted how we think about even outsourcing, and even the work that's being done. We have to also be cognizant of how the outsourcing partners' resources are able to work, and how that's going to impact the results that we see.
Joe?
Yeah, and the thing I'll add to that is the compensating controls to these new risks of people working from home constantly, with access to stuff that people used to always say, well, we'll never allow that to take place from home. But now they've been doing it from home for 3 months. And making sure that you have the right controls, whether that's USB drive shutdown or keyboard monitoring or, all your email sensitive data checking, things like that. And then reinforcing with people. You say, hey, because people are working from home, even just pushing out the message of, we're going to allow people to do this, and we trust you're going to act responsibly. And provider, we're going to hold you accountable to the things that we put in our contract. And we want to make sure that you're re-emphasizing and retraining your people around these risks and controls.
All right. So we're up against it. Great commentary, everybody. One last point on that one I'd like to throw in. We've all had some boss somewhere who has said, if you can do it from home, it could be done from India. And as people get comfortable managing people remotely, that may actually drive even greater comfort
It's very
levels
interesting.
with outsourcing.
Yeah.
So I want to thank both of you, gentlemen. Outstanding, great feedback. And everybody, please take a look at the calendar. These are monthly sessions, and we look forward. We thank everybody for participating, our panelists and our attendees, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks.